Our scripture reading this morning comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29 through chapter 12, verse 2. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they'd been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Will you please pray with me? And now, O God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. We'll get to Hebrews in a minute. I just wanted to say something. I felt guilty bringing it up as a joy when Meredith asked for those, but my socks tell the story, okay? This is my joy. I've been working on it. I did some stretches this morning. You can ask Lori. She was there one day. I made the mistake of kicking my foot up on top of the pulpit to show off socks. So I've been wearing crazy socks forever. Yeah, football season is upon us. So let us all rejoice. There will be some hot Fridays and Saturdays, and I look so forward to it. When I started to look at scripture readings and wondered what were we going to talk about today, I read the text from the epistle to the Hebrews, and it struck me. And so as I began to look through things and to dig things up and to process what I had read, I found several authors who said, hey, by the way, this is probably the first time you've ever preached on Hebrews. Your church may have never heard anything about Hebrews before because we skip over it. So tell them a little about it. I agree, because it's important stuff. The epistle to the Hebrews. Now traditionally, we say it was written by Paul. As a matter of fact, in the 1611 version of the King James Bible, it's actually entitled the Epistle to the Hebrews. Oh no, the Epistle of Paul, the Apostle to the Hebrews. That's what we've understood. And we know that it was really out there around that time because in 95, not 1995, in 95, Clement of Rome, Pope Clement of Rome, references Paul's letter to the Hebrews. Sometimes I wish I was Origen Skaggs, but that probably wouldn't go over well. These early church leaders began to have their doubt because they spent a lot of time with these letters, and they said, this is Paul's theology. This is Paul's message. But these aren't Paul's words. These sound nothing like the other letters that Paul has written. So, well, this was probably the word of Paul written down by someone else. And that's when it gets really confusing. Because then everybody tries to come up with someone else. At the end of that 1611 version of the King James Bible, where the translator started by saying, the epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Hebrews, ended with, written to the Hebrews from Italy by Timothy. What? The epistle of Paul, the Apostle to the Hebrews, written to the Hebrews from Italy by Timothy. So when you begin to talk about Hebrews and you want to look up who wrote this letter, whose words are these actually, you find out, you're not going to find out. You're not going to find out because tradition tells us one thing and then another thing. And scholarship tells us about 5 other things. Good luck. I'm becoming And so you have to turn someplace else, and there are clues that become very important. And that's when it was written. This is really cool to me because we know that Clement, the Pope, Clement I, referenced this letter in his letter to the churches in Rome in 95. 95. The church has been hearing the epistle to the Hebrews for over 2,000 years. 1,900 years. I'll get my math right. For over 1,900 years. And so then you begin to look at the other things that take place, and you're like, well, if they were the words of Paul, then we know it's got to be around 60, right? So 60 to 95. 35 years is a long time unless you're talking about 1,900 years ago. And then 35 years is the blink of an eye. We can even say a little bit more that it was after the fall of the temple in 70. So why is it important to narrow down the writing of this epistle to a 25-year span? Because we need to know what they were experiencing. We need to know what was going on when we hear the words of the epistle of the Apostle Paul to Hebrews. Hebrews is written to a community that was beginning to doubt itself. You see, earlier on, they had Jesus, and Jesus was there, and Jesus said, I'm going to come back. And it's been, at this point, 40, 50, 60 years. That's several generations, and still no Jesus. Come on, you get it after 3 days, and we still haven't seen him? And not only that, but people were starting to think they were like this crazy band of followers, right? These are those goofy people that kind of do things a little bit differently. And then they had seen their friends stoned, hung on crosses. You heard what they said in the letter. Sawn in two, ripped from limb to limb. This was a persecuted community. They were hurting. Everywhere they went, they faced danger. And we know that. We know that not just because it's in Hebrews. We know that because history tells us that this is what happened. They were imprisoned. They were persecuted. They were tortured. They faced hostility everywhere they went, and they began to doubt the very reason that they were there. It's a story we've heard before, isn't it? As they left Egypt, and they wandered through the wilderness, and they began to question, why are we even here? And the answer that was given when they were in the wilderness for 40 years is the same answer that they were given in the epistle of the Apostle Paul to the Hebrews. Remember where you came from. Remember the people who came before you. Remember what they experienced. Remember that before they headed into the desert, they had to get away from Egypt, and they did. Remember that when they had to cross the ocean, it seemed impossible. They did. Remember that when they got to the place God had promised, they realized they weren't welcome. They did it. And they did it through their faith, but they did it also through God's faith in them. I'm tracking. One of the things that I probably don't have to tell you is that I'm a little strange. You may have figured that out over the last year. I mean, truly, this has been a year. If you haven't figured out that I'm a little strange, then that's okay. I am. I will own that. And one of the things that I like to do that causes me probably to seem a little strange is I don't like to take the highways. If I have time. Now, if I have to be someplace pretty quickly, if I have to get out to, I don't know, say the regional office pretty quickly, I now know I can just go up 820 and I can get there pretty quickly. But when I come home and I don't have to be there, I take the back roads. I wander through the neighborhoods. I've done it all my life. Now, when I was a kid, it was a little bit dangerous because there's no such thing as GPS. And I got lost a few times. But now if you get lost, you just, oh yeah, that's where I am. It'll get me there. And you find out some interesting things, don't you? I got to tell you about some of these stories. Well, one of the things I like to do when we do that, my kids will tell you this, and they, I wish I could say they loved it, is I like to find old churches. I love to find old churches and walk through Haynes going, eh. He's just saying that because when we were in Albuquerque last week getting Jared, we found an old church. We found the old Cathedral of Albuquerque built in 1790. Oh, wow. And then Hayden says, you pulled the minister card, Dad. We pulled the minister card, and we got a special tour of the Cathedral of Albuquerque built in 1793. We got to go places nobody else got to go, including the restroom. So it was pretty cool. Churches are just part of the reason I like to go through these back roads. I also like to get a feel for the community that I'm in. I like to look around me, and regardless of the state of the community that I'm in at that moment, I remember that there are people who live there. I remember that there are people whose hopes and dreams built that community, and I remember that the people who live there right now have their own hopes and dreams. And that all of those are predicated on one thing: faith. It may not be the same faith that we share, but it's faith in the future. Hope for the future. This last week as I left the regional office, I said, this area looks kind of familiar. I've been here before. And I look up and I'm on Meadowbrook. And I drove down Meadowbrook and I came by this church called Assured Faith Church of God in Christ. I've been there before. But this time I stopped and I got out and I went and I touched the walls. And I walked around them. And then I left there. And you know, I went down Meadowbrook because, well, you can see AT&T Stadium going down Meadowbrook, and that's kind of like a beacon. And all of a sudden I look up and I'm on Sandy Lane. I can turn right. And I went down and I got out of my car and I walked around and I touched the walls. I thought about the faith that built it. I thought about the faith that didn't just build those, but went all the way back. The other day, Dana and I were driving home from our staff day at the food bank. She went and volunteered with us, and we decided to drive through Fort Worth instead of getting on 287 and 820 and 20 and all the way back home. And we ended up in Poly, and I thought about the Poly Church. I thought about the faith that built that then led to where we are today. When I get into these places in town, when I go to places that seem long lost and forgotten, the places where sometimes the weeds are taller than the buildings, I remember that we all have roots. And those roots, they don't just keep us, some people say roots keep us grounded. They don't just keep us grounded, they are what gives us life. These roots that have brought us to where we are today. There is danger in equating ourselves with the ancient Hebrews. There is serious danger. They were a persecuted minority. They were tortured and imprisoned and killed and faced hostility every day. I'm uneasy with the idea that we read there and that we hear about God guiding them to military victory, especially when we begin to use that language ourselves as if for some reason we're the only ones who God sides with in the killing of other people. I'm uncomfortable. I'm just going to be honest. I'm uncomfortable with some of that language. But I recognize that it's their roots. This last week, Lori's mom sent us a newsletter article from Lori's home church. And the minister began talking about how his church in Oklahoma City, Northwestern Christian Church in Oklahoma City, had voted to close. And then he said, by the way, Eastside Christian Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we need to have a meeting. Because things don't look good. And I'm not sure how much longer we can do it. Leadership from our church this week went over to Northwest Christian Church in Arlington, a place we know well, and talked to them because they're experiencing the same thing. We don't know what our future holds. And it can be difficult. It can be very difficult to be a member of a church. No, we don't have to worry about walking outside and being killed for who we are. But we look around us and the places where our roots were, they've started to go in other directions. But, and there's always a but, those parts of our past, those places that we have been, remind us. In the same way that the stories of faith reminded the ancient Hebrews, those places that we've been, those places where our roots were formed, remind us that the future is always based on faith. And it was faith that gave them the future that they built. It was faith that led to the future that we live. And it's faith that leads us into the future that we're called to be a part of. There is never certainty. There is always risk. But when we do ministry together, when we decide that this place and this time has led us to do ministry together, we grow stronger. I have no doubt that the members of Northwestern Christian Church in Oklahoma City, or the members of Eastside Christian Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the ministers of so many, I can go through the yearbook of churches that are no longer here, in Arlington, and Dallas, and Fort Worth, left something that is being felt today. And so when I stopped at Handley Meadowbrook and when I stopped at Sandy Lane, I didn't do so just to check the place out. I did so to get a sense of the idea that we have come from something. That we didn't just end up here. That the faith of the people who came before us led us to this place. And sometimes it's hard. And sometimes we just sit and wonder, holy cow, what do we do next? And when we do that, the message to the Hebrews from Paul or Timothy or whoever still resonates today. Remember. Remember. You aren't doing this alone. Remember. You're not trying to live this life by yourself. Remember, not only are you surrounded by the prayers of those who gather with you, you're surrounded by the prayers of those who came before you and the prayers of those who will come after us. I had coffee the other day with a friend, and we don't get to have coffee nearly often enough. But as we sat down and visited, she said this: the world doesn't need another church. The world needs a prophetic voice of justice and mercy and hope. Prophetic voice of the epistle to the Hebrews is that there is a voice of justice and mercy, and we've heard. There's a voice of justice and mercy that has cried out for thousands of years and moved thousands and hundreds or millions of people forward in their faith, and that voice continues to call us, and it encourages us. It encourages us in prayer. It encourages us in worship. It encourages us when we laugh. It encourages us when we get a little misty-eyed about the things that have come before us. It encourages us and moves us forward. The early church, both the church lost in the desert and the church that was written to in the epistle to the Hebrews, was ready to give up. They had it. They didn't know what the future held, and they were scared. And the author encourages them to be faithful. To be faithful to who they are, to be faithful for those who came before them, to be faithful to those who will come after them, and to continue to do ministry. I am so excited about next week. I'm so excited about a friend of mine coming and leading us and talking to us. We've been on this journey for a while. This isn't the end. It's a continuation to move us forward. We've talked about it. We've begun to live it. And here's the thing that will continue to help us grow in this faith. That we're optimistic about what's out there. And so as you prepare to come and join with us next Saturday, I want you to come with a question. What are you optimistic about for the future? What about the future of your church and your faith causes you to be optimistic? Then how can you make that happen? Amen.